everyone. I'm so excited to be here with Mr. Hans TenDam, the pioneer of transpersonal regression therapy, author of various books, and the founder of the course that I have personally learned and will teach it all about you. So Hans, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And I wanted to create this video today specifically for people that are wanting to be therapists so that we can learn how a master does what he does. So let's start with the basics. Hans, I've heard you in class say that regression therapy has three parts. There's the regression, the energetic word, and personifying things.
Yes.
Can you tell me for you, what are the key components of the regression part?
The idea is that whatever problem somebody wants to solve, the problems start at once. And basically regression is to find out how it started, and sometimes to find out why it has not been solved in the meantime. So it's to find out the story of a symptom, and of course do that in a way that will lead to solution.
Okay. And in that part of finding out why something started, is it also to release, is the catharsis included in that part, or does that come in a different one for you?
Sometimes finding out the origin, like a special traumatic event in your childhood, may release the tension already. So sometimes the catharsis is almost spontaneous, but let's not go into too many details, but very often you need to do something extra. And just finding out the origin is not always enough. If something terrible happened when I was 6 years old and I could not get over that, and for example, I closed off a part of myself, it's possible that when I relive that emotions come up and it can be released. But it's also necessary, for example, that you make almost a split between the present personality and the 6-year-old. It's a kind of interaction. Me and my 6-year-old, and the therapist will learn how to do that it is released, that it is resolved.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is it's about understanding the cause, going through the story, and releasing the emotions that are behind it.
And part of that is reliving.
Yes.
It's not only intellectual understanding, it's understanding completely. And reliving means, for example, a bit of an overstatement, but you can smell again that you're standing in the kitchen with your mother. It can become so alive.
Yeah. And with that, you also have energy work and personification work. For somebody that doesn't understand, how would you describe what is energy work?
Well, the easiest way to compare the three things, the three methods, is to see how you get there. With regression, you say basically to a client, to put it very simple, go back to the place and time that it started. And we are going to relive that. With personification, it may mean that you imagine that the cause of your problem will, for example, enter your space. Or that you, in this case, see the 6-year-old entering your room so you can discuss, you can interact with the 6-year-old. And energy work means that, for example, if I'm hurt as a 6-year-old, is to feel that hurt right now. And for example, at that moment I wanted to cry, but I was afraid to cry, and there was a huge tension inside me to repress my tears, to give the instruction to let it go. So usually with energy work, the client will have physical experiences.
And does this go hand in hand with the regression and reliving? Because as you are reliving, you're also in that story and feeling the energy, as you said.
Yeah. But it's, for example, I relive the tension. It's possible I feel the tension right now in my body, and reliving is not enough. You have to help the client to really let go of the tension in the body here and now. So That's energy work. And if you take a variety that's a bit more uncommon, it's possible to experience that tension like something is holding you. It's like you are bound. It's to release that bonds. Or what you lost at that time was innocence. And you can ask the client, it's a bit superficial example, but it's pretty. What color does innocence have for you? Let's say pearly white with a dash of green. And we help the client to see pearly white, to experience pearly white with a dash of green. And then we relate that to body sensation. Okay. All that has to do with making the experience, both of the original problem and of the solution now, as full and as lively as possible.
And how would you sort of describe transpersonal regression therapy to somebody that has no idea what this is about? Why would they even want to do this?
Well, why would they want it? Because it's very effective. It's more effective than, as far as I know, any other type of psychotherapy. What makes it transpersonal? For example, somebody feels rejected. In a regression, we find out that it started with the birth. Now, the first thing why it's not normally personal but transpersonal, because normally we cannot remember our birth. But in a good session, if you are deep enough, you can remember your own birth. You can relive it. And it's also transpersonal because, for example, somebody feels rejected because he experienced that when the father holds the baby, that the father is, and you may say in a session, you will now sense, or you will now feel, you will now experience what your father is thinking at that moment. Well, then you go beyond your own person. It's like you say to the client, you are psychic, or you are telepathic. And the client may discover suddenly that the father is worried if he can earn enough money to take care of the child, and that the father does not reject the child, but the father has this hesitation because of worry. And that may give a huge release.
Yeah, and we keep those things in ourselves.
Yeah.
So I'm a therapist myself, and I was wondering how you would answer a question coming from a skeptic who says, why should I even go and look at the past? Why do I not just want to look forward in my life? Yeah.
Be my guest. If it works for you, it works. Usually it doesn't work. Of course, we are not going into the past, but we have an archive in ourselves. We are our past. And we only go to the past to find out what is the trouble here and now. Why should you go to the past? Well, curiosity could be a reason. And there's nothing against curiosity, but that's not therapy. You go to solve something. So we are rummaging through our files, because those files contain problems that we experience here and now.
Yeah. And so by addressing that, you're actually curing the here and now, because
of course,
this is what
that's
is
the
the cause
point.
behind
Yeah.
it, yes.
Yeah.
So we've looked at now these three components. We have the reliving and the energy work, which is the feelings and the things combined, and through personification, understanding what's going on. The way you work is very intuitive. So if I had to regress you back to a session, what happens in your mind before you ask your client the next question? And this is something especially for myself and other therapists to know.
Of course, and that is not really answering your question. It's mainly experience. It helps tremendously if the client is in a space, the client has a block, and that you remember from other sessions, oh, this could be a question of. A second answer, maybe better, is you have to trust the intuition of the client. And if the client really has a problem, and if I say to the client, and the client is really concentrated on it, you will now get an impression when it started. or you will now get an impression what you need to resolve, the client gets it. So very often, the questions or the suggestions you give are pretty open. They are focused, but you are not assuming that you know. And of course, you have to observe. If the client is just talking about the problem and suddenly, with the use of a certain word, the client becomes emotional, you know, that's where the moment you ask to focus on that.
There's so many different ways you can go in the session. Even if you get somebody outside the door who is your younger self, which we call inner child, or a past life character.
Yeah.
There are different questions you can ask, there are different ways you can go. So how do you know which way you're going to go? What goes through your mind just before you speak? If we had to sort of play that in slow motion.
Well, we have the client, we have the therapist, and we have what I call the contract. What is the issue? What does the client wants to resolve? For example, a kind of depression, a bad feeling, and the client does not know exactly what is the cause. So the client says, for example, I feel overwhelmed. Being overwhelmed is not growing on trees. You are overwhelmed by somebody, by something, by some condition. So you will ask, or you will suggest, you will now get an impression, what is overwhelming you? Or, if the client is a bit distant, is not into it, you may ask, oh, this is not going to work. The client has to experience the problem better. So you ask, for example, what happens when you're overwhelmed? Maybe you can even suggest close your eyes, because the experience of being overwhelmed should become more actual. And for the rest, it's very difficult for me to answer your question, because the more experience you get, the least you need to reflect. But it's like dancing. I call it a tango. So you should lead the client in a certain way, but the steps that the client takes and your steps should be...
Yeah. Do you create a picture in your mind of what the client is saying? Like if I'm feeling overwhelmed and you ask me a question that gets me to really feel it, are you creating a picture of what I'm feeling?
No, I try to avoid it completely, because if I can't say that sometimes there's a picture, but I want to avoid to project my picture.
Okay.
Because if I start to have a picture of being overwhelmed, I will use my own experience, and I will think, oh, okay, well, you shouldn't go there. You should stay with the client.
Okay. So if you get me to experience the overwhelm and I'm really feeling it, then what happens in your mind and where would you go next after that?
Let me give a terrible, simple answer. I could say to the client, if he's really experiencing the overwhelming situation, what would you have needed at that moment to get out of this? For example, support. What would be your ideal support? And you see, there is a part of psychology, it's called Gestalt psychology, it's 100 years old, that in our minds we have holes and we have incomplete holes. So if it's overwhelmed, what do I need to really get to that? I need to know the cause of overwhelm, and I need to know how to get out.
Yeah.
So the first thing always is to get the situation as fully experienced as possible. And the second is to find out how it came about. And the third one is, and what has been the consequences? And why do you need how to find out? Because I feel very, very heavy. I feel overwhelmed. And then I do a session and suddenly it's gone. I feel great. But if I do not understand how it came about, tomorrow I may feel a new overwhelming situation. I can be afraid that it comes back. So I think basically all the time you either are going to deepen or enrich the experience of the client, or you go one step before, or you go one step after.
Okay, that's very useful. So if I just summarize that very simply, it's to experience it fully, understand what's caused it, and then the impact. And we're also looking at what the client could have needed. So in other words, what was missing at that time.
Yes, exactly.
And we look at what was incomplete, what was missing, so we can get the full picture, then get them to release what happened and add what's missing into the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course sometimes, but that's not specific for our way of working, but if the client is still insecure, you do a future pace. So the client picture himself, herself in a future situation and try to feel how it would be to be there, not overwhelmed.
Yes. So another question I wanted to ask you is, a lot of therapists believe that in order to truly see a past life or understand something, they need to go into each and every scene, right from birth to death of that life to understand
Please
it.
don't.
Yes, and you don't work like that at all. So can you explain to us what you think are the important components of the regression part, especially with something like a past life?
If somebody is reliving their past life, it's reliving it for a reason. It's related to the present life. Now, if I would ask people in the street if they remember their past lives, they would look at me strangely because most people don't remember their past lives. And there's a good reason for that. Because you live the life now. If I had been in a past life a mentally handicapped girl, what's the use of remembering that? I'm a different person now. I only remember it because that girl is still, in a sense, with me. Which means, in our way of thinking, that that girl didn't die properly. So almost always you have to find out the situation in the past life that caused the problem. But you almost always have to go to the death experience.
Okay.
Because something there did not go fully well. And again, there's the same thing. If I've been mentally handicapped in a past life, I probably have been born like that. But it's also possible when I was 6 years old, something fell on my head and there was a bleeding, and since then I was mentally handicapped. People want to know the origin.
Yeah. So do we, in that case, need the full picture? Or how do you know how much of the picture that you need to know?
You can see that, you can feel it from the client. And of course, as a therapist, you are a detective. You find the culprit, you find the origin. And if that's not clear, you want to know a little bit more. Now it's possible that the client doesn't want you to go there. They rather do not remember. Then you're stopped. You can't go on with the... But that is pretty rare. And of course, at the other hand, you have to be careful that you are not going to lead the client in a process that is to satisfy your curiosity. So you have also to feel if the client says, I'm not interested in that, if that is a real answer or it's kind of defense.
Okay. So from what I'm understanding, since every person you see has a contract, so to speak, which is an objective, based on that contract, you only do the regression to what's relevant to that contract, and you don't need anything else.
No. It's possible that I sense during, or I seem to perceive during the process that this problem is related to something else. And the client doesn't want to go there. If the client doesn't want to go there, that's it. But I may say again to the session, listen, there's a connection with that other thing, and I would not be surprised if there is something to resolve. And I leave that to the client. The client may come back to that or not.
And that's again about finding the cause, which is our
Yes.
detective work.
Yeah.
And because you flow so fluidly, would you say that there's any specific rules that's a must do or must do not do in regression therapy?
That's difficult. I was going to say always tie in with the last thing the client experienced, said, relived. But that's a basic rule, but that's not always true. Sometimes you have to surprise the client, to come with a suggestion or a question that the client would never have expected, but is tying in with the thing at hand. So, for example, the client is complaining about problems in her life. And we may do some reliving, we may find out, but at the same time I sense, or I think I see, that the client talking about the problem is always blaming other people. And of course, other people may do things to you that you can blame them for, but it's always blaming the others. So you may give a certain suggestion is to focus them, to trigger that they go to a place where they have exhibited the awful behavior that they are complaining about with other people. Now that may be a shock to the client, and you can only do that if there is a good relationship of trust, of confidence, and that may give a certain insight and breakthrough.
Okay.
So, to put it very simple, you either follow the client as precise as possible, or you bring in a complete new perspective.
Okay.
And that's always a bit risky, because the client may not want that.
And when are the times where it's good to follow, and when are the times where it's good to bring in something that's the opposite to shock them?
If you hear a story, and the story is interesting, you are listening. So you want to know what's next, what's happening, what's next, what's next. But if this is leading nowhere, it's like you read a story, you become bored, and you miss something. And then you have to go for something which approach the whole thing from a new angle.
Okay.
I have learned a lot from literature about writing stories, books, or scripts, movie scripts, to help the client to get a good script. So for a story, you also need to know if something happened, what was before, what was after. And just like in the movie, that suddenly you see the whole situation from another perspective. I felt very much abandoned by my father. And it's possible that you give kind of instruction to see the whole thing from the perspective of the father. So it's a change of perspective.
Right.
But of course, that's the more difficult thing. The basic is to focus on where the client has a problem, to help the client to focus on that, and then to go step by step.
Yeah.
But, for example, the client relives a situation where he's frozen. Now let's not go to a past life, but it's something on school, primary school or something. And of course, you experience how frozen he is, and then because of being frozen, something bad happens. But of course you have to find out, why did the client get frozen? And if that's not becoming clear, you may have to go back a bit more. And you find out, for example, that he copied that behavior from his father or mother. Or you come in a past life. And usually you'll find that there's a kind of traumatic death experience where just before death the client is completely frozen.
Right.
So the experience of coming out of that is not there. The movie stops at that moment, so to speak, and it's still,
Yeah, and that's part of the detective work of understanding the cause and finding the cause.
yeah.
And you were mentioning that we follow the client with a story, so we go step by step by step. And just to kind of reiterate, when do we not do that would be when a client is repeating themselves
For
or
example,
being in a
repeating.
victim mode.
It's very simple. You get bored.
So you might get bored and I might get bored in a different space.
Yeah.
So is that just up to me to decide that I'm bored? Or is it something else I'm looking
Well,
out for?
sure. Well, first of all, if you're getting bored,
Is it
you
repetitive?
try to find out why,
Mm.
and you give a new situation to try to get a new view on things, or getting some new information. But it's possible that you give a suggestion or you ask a question, and the client doesn't. So that may be dead end road. So you have to forget about that. If it's happening all the time, it means that you and the client are simply not a good team.
Okay. And then you bring in either the shock factor of going
Yeah.
back to when they were the perpetrator of their own
For
problems,
example, yeah.
or a different perspective that they're not seeing, because it sounds like if you're getting bored, the client may be going in circles.
Yeah.
That there is something that's repetitive going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whatever the client is coming for, the client is never visiting you because he wants to run around in circles.
Yeah.
And of course, very often people want to solve a problem, but they don't like to see really what is causing the problem.
Yeah.
And they don't like to see their own role. If they are complaining all the time about their father, they may have good reasons for that. But it's also possible that they are always pushing it there because they don't want to look at the role of the mother or at their own role.
Yes. And it's to really be able to see what the client is doing to spot that. Yeah. So then if we go back to are there any must-dos or must-do-not-dos, it sounds like that's not there. You're just following the client. Perhaps from studying this work, I could say that the must-do would be finally to imbibe the qualities of the parts of you that you have healed and resolved. Yeah, which could be a literal integration or an embracing of it.
Yeah.
And then the must-do-not-do could be we don't embrace anything that doesn't belong to us.
No,
Yeah.
unless we love it. But then we have to understand the relationship.
That it's not our own.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to understand when you yourself feel stuck or you don't know where to go in a session, what do you do?
My mind has a strong resistance of getting stuck. So, you see, if you have some equipment and it doesn't work, you can talk to it. And if nothing works, for example, with a computer, you plug and unplug it, and you plug it again, you try something. And everything is better than doing nothing. But you can try that once, twice, 3 times. And of course, if every time it doesn't, it's also becoming boring, and the client is not helped. So in the end, you kick the equipment. And the most simple thing to do that with a client is not, of course, to hit the client, or to plug or unplug the client, at least I wouldn't know how to do that, but to give a short circuit. For example, I believe I have given that example already. You will now get an impression what is really troubling you. And pretty often they get an impression. Sometimes they don't understand what they get, and I may get it. For example, you now get an impression of the solution, and they see a dog with a wagging tail. I will ask, is that a dog you know? No, just a dog. Is the dog wanting anything from you? I don't think so. And in the end, I can even suggest, imagine, feel that you become the dog. And you feel you have, and suddenly, something else happens. So you
play around, you test.
You play around, you test.
And these things that you're saying, imagine the solution and it could be a dog, are these metaphors for something? How would you describe what those are?
Well, first of all, the first explanation is that once you have met a real dog that was wagging its tail. So you've tried to find if there is some memory. So for example, where are you when you meet this dog? It's also possible that like the picture of the dog and there is no background, there is no situation. Then you're pretty sure that it is metaphoric.
Okay.
Still then, I want to make you see that metaphor for a reason. So I may ask, how's the dog feel? The dog is excited. Okay. What has been the last time that you have been excited like this? And then the dog is a metaphor for being excited. And we have to go to moments that the client has been, or the client will say, well, I think since I left home when I was 18, I've never been excited anymore. Oh, that's opening up a new avenue, of course.
Yeah.
So what happened when you left home? So a part of you died, for example. It's also possible when you leave home that a part of you is being born, of course,
Yeah.
or liberated.
Yeah. Well, what I love about this work a lot is you're leaving it to the client. So we're not suggesting anything to the client. The client is getting the impression of what could be the solution, what is needed, what is missing.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a client who tells you that I'm blank? For everything you say, can't say anything, I don't know, I don't know.
And then I would end the session within half an hour.
How would you handle that? What would you say to this
I
client?
would say sorry,
Okay.
and I may even not bill the client because this is not going to work.
Okay.
For whatever reason. Maybe the client is resistant. Maybe the client has been sent by his wife. I've had several of those cases. Maybe you have an off day, we don't know. You see, if you have a breakthrough, you can find out what happened and how it happened. But if there's a real blank, you cannot always know why there is a blank.
Okay.
Because you don't get the process done.
So in order for this to work, there needs to be something from the client. You cannot have a client who says, I don't know, or I'm blank
Oh, absolutely
for whatever
not.
reason.
No.
Yeah.
And also, I would say that's an extremely boring client.
Yes.
And the client is not there to entertain me, of course, but to have a fruitful, productive process that leads to something.
I think that's useful for therapists to also know that it's okay to say no. Because if it's not going to work, then why are we pushing it?
Yeah,
And if it can work, then magic can happen.
yeah.
Yeah. Are there any tips that you would give to new therapists that are just getting into transpersonal regression therapy or just qualifying and learning your course?
Have a little faith. I can't promise that you will be lucky, but if you have a good intention, you may get the kind of clients that will help you to develop. So, in the beginning, for example, you need a few successes. Now, we cannot push that. You have to be lucky. Except for one thing, if you know your own strengths and weaknesses, you try to get clients that fit. For example, I'm bad, I'm weak with certain types of problems and certain types of clients, so I simply don't take them.
Okay.
And in the beginning, you may not know, you have to find out. I have learned this trait mainly from my clients. By interacting with the clients and trying something and then something works and then you find out, oh, this is working with more people, and then you find out, oh, it's working with many people, but not with this type of people. So it's experience all the way. And of course exchanging with other colleagues that have experiences.
Do you have a screening process where you know when to take
In a
clients?
sense, well, first, I do not advertise in any way. So all the clients that come to me are referred by other clients. And I ask them always 4 questions in advance, and I want to have an answer by mail a few days before the session. I ask them, what's your problem? What do you want to solve? How long do you have this problem? What have you been done so far? And with what results? Because if the client has belly aches and the client has never gone to a doctor, I will not accept that client because I don't take it serious.
Okay.
And also if the client is given answers that are extremely short. So what did you do? Saw a doctor. Okay. That means the client probably is not open to explore that problem with me. And sometimes clients give answers that take many, many pages. And my experience is that's also not going to work. So that's an implicit screening.
Okay. So those 4 questions have been enough for you?
Yes.
Yeah, to understand that. Okay, thank you so much, Hans. Thanks for your
You're
time,
welcome.
and this has been very useful.
I hope this has been
everybody
useful.
else.
Yes, thank you.